Who wins when AI restacks the knowledge economy? My name is Bo Hayden, and our mission at DCI is to place innovation at the center of policy and regulation. DCI is co-hosted by the UC Berkeley and the European University Institute. We run several programs with different stakeholder groups, including policymakers, law and economics professionals, industry representatives, and academics. In particular, we run the Dynamic Competition Policy Lab, the Young Scholars Program, and industry roundtables, in addition to webinars on key topics, as we will do today. The agenda for today, we'll start with a presentation of the book by the author, Sangeet Paul Choudary, followed by three discussants, including Carliss Baldwin, Riitta Katila, and Nicolas Petit. Now I'd like to introduce the author. Sangeet Paul Choudary is a globally recognized strategist, author, and advisor, best known for his pioneering work on platform economics and network effects, including the best-selling books Platform Revolution and Platform Scale. He's a senior fellow at the UC Berkeley's Tusher Strategic Initiative for Technology Leadership and an advisor to Fortune 500 leaders, where he has helped shape how executives think about digital platforms, ecosystems, and the transition from pipelines to platforms. His latest book, Reshuffle, reframes AI not as a smarter brain, but as a coordination technology that rewires work, competition, and power in the knowledge economy. And it has quickly become one of the most talked about strategy books on AI. Reshuffle has received wide critical acclaim. It won the 2025 Thinkers 50 Strategy Award for the most impactful idea in strategy, has been praised by Inc. as a book that will change the way you think about AI, and has been highlighted by the Financial Times for offering a powerful framework to see the bigger picture of AI-driven transformation. We're very happy to have you here, Sangeet. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to speak about Reshuffle. I'm going to start sharing my slides. I usually, start talking about Reshuffle by essentially using this slide, which is to say that everybody has a view on AI. And a lot of those views, I believe, tend to miss the real opportunity with AI, because a lot of the views are focused on AI as an alternative to human effort, AI as a better way to perform certain tasks, AI as an alternative to human intelligence if we get to AGI. So there's a lot of focus on the impact of AI on tasks. And very often, when even the best experts talk about the impact of AI on jobs, which obviously is an issue that everybody deeply cares about, much more than they care about strategy and other things, they tend to frame AI as something that's progressively improving, and as the frontier improves, it's increasingly going to get more people out of jobs, because it's going to provide an effective substitute to human performed effort and human performed thought, for that matter. But repeatedly, we see many of these prophecies not work out as expected. At the same time, we do see examples of job loss. So we tend to very quickly see this polarization where people swing into two extremes. Are we talking about AI taking away jobs, or AI dramatically increasing the leverage that human effort can have, automation versus augmentation? We see people dramatically taking two extremes in terms of boom and doom. AI will make the world a fundamentally better place, versus AI will lead to widespread job loss, and without a security blanket, disenfranchisement of a lot of people. And a lot of these things ignore the fact that it's entirely possible for the pie to grow and yet not be sliced equally. And they also ignore exactly what are the mechanisms through which the pie grows, because one of the common ways to explain why the pie grows is that there'll be fundamentally new sources of demand. But it does not necessarily talk about how the structure of industries, for instance, could change because of a new technology coming in. And so one thing that I felt was in common to a lot of these prophecies or frameworks that people were using, which prompted me to write Reshuffle. There were three different factors that prompted me to write Reshuffle, which I'll get into as we go along this. But the first was the fact that I felt that a lot of the discussion on AI is stuck in a task-centric lens. So we look at whether AI can perform a task well, whether it can substitute a human's effort on that task versus whether it can, enhance that human's effort on that task. And so we focus entirely at the level of tasks. We assume that jobs are very stable constructs consisting of tasks, and hence, when AI impacts those tasks, the jobs, which are the larger containers within which those tasks are contained, get impacted as a result as well. But what all of this often misses is that tasks actually sit or are performed as part of a larger system of value creation. Tasks sit inside workflows. Workflows are organized through organizational systems, whether through traditional hierarchical organizations or through other forms of organizational systems, eventually towards creating value and competing in a connected ecosystem. So when we talk about the impact of AI, if we do not look at the impact of AI at all these other levels, how is AI going to change the way companies compete? Is AI going to change the way companies compete? Is AI going to change the location of value? Is AI going to move value from one point in an ecosystem to another? Is AI going to fundamentally value new capabilities than were valued in the past? Unless we think of the entire system, we really do not have a cohesive, comprehensive view to think about the impact of AI. And to make this point, the first distraction that I wanted to move the leader away from, and I was writing this for the general leader, somebody who does not understand modularity, does not understand ecosystems, does not understand some of these concepts, but is keen about understanding how AI impacts their job, their firm, the economy in general. To make that point, I first start the book with these four words: why unintelligent AI matters. Because most of the discussion around AI today is essentially rooted in this idea of, do you have a fifth grader in your pocket, or do you have a team of PhDs in your pocket? And that's how every new rollout of a model is being marketed. And so there's an overemphasis on intelligence. And so the key argument that I make in the introduction of my book is that this is an intelligence distraction, because whether AI can think like a human or not does not really matter. What does matter is that as AI improves, it becomes increasingly capable of performing certain forms of economically valuable work, and hence how work will be allocated between AI capabilities and human capabilities will change and will get impacted as a result of that. And so what really matters is how the economic system gets reorganized around progressively improving AI capabilities. So it's less about the raw intelligence, because the reason I start with that argument before I get to anything else is one of the most common things that people point to today is generative AI's inability to do X, Y, Z. Posts about that go viral on LinkedIn. But my key point is that the intelligence is not really what matters. What matters is how the socio-technical system organizes or reconfigures itself around the capabilities of a new technology. And to make that point, the opening example in the book that I take is that of container shipping. A lot of people take examples of electricity and other technologies to show the impact of AI, but I wanted to take the example of containers. I also want to take the example of barcodes, and the reason for that was, again, to take something that is at the other end of the spectrum from intelligence, is pretty much a dumb technology, and yet had massive impact through second and third order effects that were not clearly anticipated at the time the technology was introduced. The shipping container is an interesting example, and I'll just go through it very briefly, because the first order effects of the shipping container really played out as automation. So the shipping container standardized cargo, and that created an interface through which cargo could be managed without human effort. Because before that, cargo came, break bulk cargo came in various shapes and forms, and you had dock workers moving things up and down from the ship. And all of that created unreliability of cargo, of cargo transportation in and out of ports. The shipping container's first effects were automation, and that created greater reliability at the port, led to job loss at the port. But if we had stopped looking at the impact of the container uh, at the level of what happened at the port, we would have missed out on everything else that happened after that. Because the real impact of the shipping container played out when trucks, trains, and ships agreed on a common format of the container, agreed on a unified contract, and that essentially ensured that goods could be shipped from source to destination, irrespective of whether they were landlocked locations or ports, equally reliably. And that essentially changed the logic of manufacturing and supply chains, because before that, manufacturing used to be co-located. You either kept everything in-house or you kept your suppliers close by, because you could not rely on unreliable shipping. And once shipping became reliable and cheap, it meant that your suppliers could be located anywhere. So clearly, new jobs came up, not directly because of the shipping container, but through its second order effects in fundamentally new places, because global supply chains came in. And global supply chains changed winners and losers by creating new jobs, elevating certain economies over others in terms of how they connected into this new system. More importantly, the nature of innovation changed and the nature of competition changed, because the shipping container unbundled manufacturing. You did not need to have everything inside the same vertically integrated firm if you could work with suppliers across the world and manage it cheaply and reliably. And that led to component level competition and component level innovation, which improved component performance, which in turn led to whole component level industries, but led to also product innovation through recombination of progressively improving components. And all of this was unlocked because of what the shipping container did. So the real story of the shipping container was that of coordination. It unlocked around its capabilities, it unlocked how economic activity, or it reorganized how economic activity was organized. And this, I really start, chapter one with this idea beyond automation, because this is again a reframing. Just like intelligence is a distraction, automation is the dominant narrative, and it's again a distraction from where I believe the real value of AI will play out, which is through fundamentally reorganizing economic activity. And there there are multiple factors because of which AI changes the nature of coordination, and I'll get into that progressively as we move through this. But essentially, what happened with the shipping container was that the effects played out through this larger system of trade. Reliable freight gave us global supply chains, which gave us the new logic of trade and globalization. And similarly, AI as a continuum of several technologies that have progressively impacted knowledge work over the last, you know, 2 decades as such, is essentially its effects play out not through its effects on tasks, but its ability to reorganize the entire system of work, to fundamentally change the rules of competition, yield entirely new organizational forms, um, eliminate, change, reimagine workflows and how work is structured, and most importantly, change how we value capabilities in any economic system. And I'll come back to the point about capabilities, because I think it's something that is very central to the book, though I don't explicitly call it out to keep the message simple for a lot of readers. But essentially, one of the key effects of AI is that traditionally tacit work becomes available increasingly as modular capabilities. And that has very important effects in terms of how that work can be organized, where it can be located, where it can be called and invoked, and where it can be recombined. And that fundamentally changes the nature of economic activity that happens on that basis. Now, one of the most, the second reason I wrote AI was because I wrote Reshuffle was because I got tired of going to dinner conversations and people telling me AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will, because it just felt wrong, and I wanted to explain why it's wrong at multiple levels. And one of the stories that I used to illustrate this is that when the word processor was invented, people would have told typists that the word processor won't take your job, but someone using a word processor will. And yet the role of a typist went away. And this is an important or an interesting way to see what really determines jobs and workflows in an organization, it's not the constituent tasks. Even if we think of a typist as somebody who types, and a painter as somebody who paints, those jobs are not structured around the task that they perform, even though that's what's most visible. Those jobs are structured around a constraint in the system, and what I call the system of work. And in the case of typists, the constraint was expensive editing. Because editing was expensive, you wanted typists who would make minimal mistakes. And so you had these typist pools who were essentially trained and managed to minimize the need for expensive editing. And with the word processor, once uh, the constraint of expensive editing went away, you could now you now have had an opportunity to allow anyone to type, irrespective of the level of training that they had. So the job of typing, or the task of typing, never went away. If we just looked at it from a task substitution lens, that task was never substituted by a machine. In fact, it became more human, quote unquote, than ever before. But what really happened over here was that the constraint that justified the job no longer existed, and hence the job associated with it did not exist anymore. And this is true for a lot of things. Even when AI comes in, human advantage does not rest on beating the machine and doing what the machine can't do. It involves managing new constraints. I take the example of the anesthesiologist, who's all of whose tasks are managed by machines. It's a very automated, or if you break down their tasks, a lot of them are automated. But the anesthesiologist commands a huge premium because they manage the risk in the operating theater. And that is the real constraint in the system. That is what makes the entire system work. And so managing risk, managing coordination, these are key constraints that keep coming up when we improve execution on individual tasks. And that's what really determines how you respond to the increasing impact of AI on work. Less of beating AI and trying to find what it cannot do and trying to do that, and more of seeing how the system is changing and looking for those new constraints in the system. The other thing that the typist example illustrates is that we often misunderstand complementarity, because we talk about automation versus augmentation, and we sort of root that logic on this idea that automation is about substitution of human effort by AI, and augmentation is complementarity, and automation is bad and augmentation is good. Well, the only thing that complementarity guarantees is that work will get allocated across humans and AI, or across human effort and AI performance. It does not guarantee preservation of today's jobs. It does not guarantee any other form of security. The only thing that it guarantees is that if we believe in complementarity, we're going to have a fundamentally new, we're going to have some reallocation of work between humans and AI that work, that together, each doing what they do best together, create value. But that is often misunderstood as being a uniformly good thing. So misunderstanding complementarity is a big issue and is a big part of the argument in the book, which really comes to the fore when we think about all of this at the level of how AI changes competition, because complementarity is something that raises its head even there, because changing complementarity changes industry boundaries, changing complementarity changes the nature of partnership and competition. And so that is really what determines how AI then redistributes where value is created and captured. One of the things that I mentioned in the last chapter of the book is that when we think about the impact of AI, we have to think about it both outside in and inside out. So first, think of it in terms of how it impacts innovation. First, any new technological shift, as I'll show shortly, creates new vectors for innovation, which allows you to create fundamentally new capabilities that did not exist before, and then compete on the basis of those capabilities, and how they are reorganized. Secondly, in the case of AI, because certain forms of knowledge work which were tied or deeply bundled, and I know the term unbundling, rebundling is not very precise, but I want to keep it simple for the reader and keep it visual, and those two uh, terms kind of show what's happening, the system breaking apart and the new system being brought together. But The other way that innovation happens, and we've seen this over the last 10 to 12 years with blurring of industry boundaries, is that um, a lot of tacit knowledge that was bundled with specialized human training inside industry boundaries now gets available as an on-demand capability that can be called from outside that industry boundary. And so once that knowledge, or I won't say knowledge, but performance of knowledge work, that unit performance of knowledge work gets unbundled from a from its exclusive human bundle and gets absorbed into an AI tool, and that's now available across industry boundaries. It enables recombination of capabilities, and that enables innovation as well. We've seen this obviously with how data would move across industry boundaries and allowed insurers to enter the automotive industry, automotive players to enter the insurance industry, and so on. The same thing will happen not just to structured data, but many forms of unstructured, relatively previously tacit knowledge work. The other thing that happens is that AI changes the nature of competition, primarily through a few mechanisms that I'll get into, but it shifts value across the ecosystem, and hence, in response to that shifting value, companies that move towards the new value and are able to harness it are in a stronger position versus those that don't. And in order to move towards that value and harness it, they can't rely on the existing capability stack. They have to think about reorganizing to harness that value. And I'll give a few examples over here. The first thing that changes competition is that AI creates a fundamentally new playing field. A very simple way to think about it is think of the contact center space today. There are SaaS companies that used to serve contact center workflows, companies like Genesys, which were built on the assumption that humans need to take support calls. Now, as agents start taking support calls as well, it allows companies like Salesforce, which have a larger horizontal play across the customer journey management space and are not playing just in the contact center or support space. It allows them to start moving in this direction. And then you have companies like Amazon and Microsoft, which have a much larger bundle across the end-to-end enterprise workflow, and with the ability to have agents take support calls, or even to reimagine the role of support by bundling support into the product workflow. These companies now start competing with Genesys as well. So the key point over here is that by changing the nature of complementarities, AI creates a fundamentally new playing field, creates fundamentally new vectors of attack, and brings in competition from completely new sources. And obviously, we've seen this, with data and cloud computing before, but AI takes it further because we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily readily visible that previously tacit knowledge work could become modular and hence could become, that modularization could create this kind of a shifting playing field. So the first thing is that AI creates a fundamentally new playing field. The second thing that I talk about in the book is that containerization and most forms of previous coordination relied on consensus. You needed to agree on a standard, you needed to agree on certain formats, and so you had what was called coordination with consensus. You needed consensus before you could coordinate. What AI allows you to do, and is progressively, as technologies improve, I'm seeing new ways of doing that, is it allows you to do coordination without consensus. And there are two or three ways in which it's readily visible. The first is that AI can process unstructured information and extract structured insight and create a structured representation of a domain by just taking fragmented pieces of unstructured information. And I take the example of a trip planning system where, your trip is completely fragmented. Every single service provider is fragmented. How you do your booking and execution of a trip is fragmented across applications, and yet you can take the outputs of these applications and throw it into an LLM and make sense of your trip. So there's a certain form of coordination without consensus capability that AI already has, with agents improving with new forms of interface technologies and protocols like model context protocol, etc., coming in. You'll have new ways to get to coordination without consensus. What that essentially means is you don't need consensus to start coordinating. You can, without consensus from other players in the system, start solving the customer problem, And the more you solve the customer problem, the more you engage them, the more you get the right to serve the customer, you can then use that power to then enforce consensus among the rest of the ecosystem. So this is the second key idea around competition. And the third key point is that the nature of competition changes because with a new technology, a player that is architecturally native to the new technology reimagines how competition works. And I'll take two very quick examples over here. One is that, when in the mid 2010s, Wall Street had declared social networks unassailable. Instagram, YouTube, they had huge network effects. And they were built on the logic of the social graph, and you could not compete with them unless you got users to move all their friends away. And what TikTok did was that it completely sidestepped that by creating a social network without creating a social graph, because it created a behavior graph, and it did so by using an AI native approach that what was needed for AI was really fast cycles of learning with minimal user investment. And they re-architected the entire user experience around that. Mobile first, less than 60 seconds of a video, tracking every single click, swipe, every single movement on the interface, and using that to infer a behavior graph, which then again, allowed them to eventually create a social graph, because it could then, once it had gained the right to serve the customer, it could then recommend who they should follow. And eventually, Facebook and others today have moved to what they call the open graph, which is essentially borrowing what TikTok did and applying it back to their social graph. So one of the key ideas over here is that incumbents typically think of AI as a tool in their existing logic. Facebook and YouTube used AI initially to improve their recommendation system, but they did not reimagine the architecture of the social network. Another really good example over here is Adobe versus Figma. I know I'm short on time. I'll try to wrap it up in the next 3 to 4 minutes. But the Adobe versus Figma is a good example because Adobe is there are big case studies about how good Adobe that transformation, but it's failed to counter Figma's success. And the reason for that is that Figma is a cloud native, architecturally cloud native company. And so Adobe is built on the logic of a file. You work on a design file, you move design file between different people. Figma is based on the logic of an element. So you can address individual elements in a file, what a button should look like, what a line should look like. Now, it sounds technical, but the reason it's important is because design is an input into many different workflows, marketing, sales, product. And what you need in an organization more than execution of design is governance of design. And Figma allows you to do that because it ensures that because you can address a button uniquely, you can have a shared library where that button can be managed by a central player and can be used in the same format across all designs. And so this shift from a file-centric architecture to an element-centric architecture fundamentally changes the game from execution to governance. Figma wins on the basis of governance. Adobe simply cannot compete with that. More importantly, and this is not always appreciated, even if Figma and Adobe have the same partners in their ecosystem, they will have fundamentally different ecosystems because Figma can open up APIs where partners can modify and query individual elements. Adobe cannot do that. Adobe can only pass files through APIs. And so the nature of the ecosystem fundamentally changes, even though the logos on their website might be the same. And so this is the shift from execution to governance is an architecturally native shift to the convergence of cloud and AI. The more we get into these connected ecosystems with modular capabilities, individual execution on a specific capability will get commoditized. Governance is going to be where the value sits. All of this, the reason I kind of talk about these issues around competition is because I fundamentally believe that there's a significant misunderstanding among executives about what the nature of change is today. Most executives today have been trained on managing operational uncertainty, which is uncertainty within a fixed structure. So, demand shocks, supply shocks, you solve that using buffers, you solve that with better prediction. What we are talking about is most uncertainty instead today that really throws companies off balance is actually not operational uncertainty, structural uncertainty, where the structure of industry is up for grabs. And the reason structural uncertainty is so interesting is because operational uncertainty is something that you have to weather through. You have to use ways to counter it, but structural uncertainty can be leveraged towards advantage if you reorganize the structure in a way so that you change the rules for other players and you get to set the rules of the game for everybody else. And that's really the larger idea of a reshuffle, that it's a way to benefit from, if you can see what's happening at the level of the system, you can use that to create advantage for yourself amidst structural uncertainty. The final, couple of points I want to make is that one of the things that prompted me to write Reshuffle is that I felt the dominant view on AI's impact, at least in the books that I was reading and the papers that I was reading, assume certain things. It assumed that the industry architecture is relatively stable and hence technology increases productivity within it. And if you try to understand AI by studying the previous 1,000 years of technological shifts, those shifts were based on that assumption. But Reshuffle's view is that industry architecture is now malleable, and hence you have to think about the reorganization of work with that. The second thing is that how value is distributed is often attributed to institutional mechanisms, wages, policy, etc. Reshuffle's view is that distribution of value is primarily a matter of architectural control in today's landscape. And so it's more through modularization, recombination, coordination that you determine how value gets redistributed. Traditional views on AI make the distinction between labor and capital. I make the distinction in Reshuffle between above the algorithm versus below the algorithm. And as more work performance moves away from labor and gets modularized as capabilities that can be invoked across industry boundaries, the distinction between labor and capital sort of starts going away, because some of the work that was performed by labor is now available as these small assets, these capabilities, which can be leveraged without the traditional approach to labor and which have characteristics of capital. And so the key idea over here essentially is that the structures and the assumptions around which, at least the books that I was reading, I felt that those do not explain what happens in today's connected ecosystem, and where AI comes in. And so that was the real motivation for writing Reshuffle. The final point that I'll just make is that the reason all of this is happening is because there are two things that are happening simultaneously. One is the modularization of work, and the other is the modularization of the value chain. And what I mean by the modularization of work is that some forms of work performance get unbundled from labor and rebundled into tools. And then the remnant human work that is modularly available, that becomes progressively commoditized as well. And the example I give is that of Google Maps augmenting the driver so that the driver's work becomes progressively commodified, interchangeable, so that you don't really care who comes to drive you on Uber, you just get the closest driver. And the more the human module becomes commoditized, the more amenable it becomes to algorithmic coordination. And that arc of modularization of work will increasingly come to all forms of knowledge work as AI capabilities improve. At the same time, we have modularization of the value chain, because of which performance of work increasingly becomes a tradable service. It's no longer just an internal capability for firms. And so the combination of these two things dramatically increases the potential complementarities that are possible. And that is where this unbundling, rebundling, recombination, modularization, all of these things take on fundamentally new shapes that are not easily imaginable if we just think about AI as impacting the task. And so those are some of the key ideas over here, that the AI's impact on work cannot be reduced to automation/augmentation. It must be understood as a structural shift in how we think about work, how it is distributed across tools and humans, how it is coordinated, and how it is then recombined. Thank you so much for listening.
Great, Sangeet. Thanks so much. I know you wrote a long book, and it's hard to get through a summary of it in a short period of time, but thanks for kicking us off with this.
Thank you.
And we did send a book to everybody, so they have the full reference as well. And hopefully this is just the beginning of a broader discussion that we can have on these issues going forward. So now I'd like to introduce Carliss Baldwin, who's the William L. White Professor of Business Administration Emerita at Harvard Business School, and one of the most influential scholars of design Modularity and Innovation in Complex Systems. She's well known for co-authoring 2 books on design rules, one on the power of modularity and its follow-up volume on how technology shapes organizations. These are landmark works that have reshaped how economists, engineers, and strategists think about platforms and modular architectures. So we're very happy to have you with us today, Carliss. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bo, and thank you, Sangeet, for writing a most wonderful book. Can you see my screen? And so is it a...
Everything's working. Everything's working, Carliss.
Okay, thank you. We had a few glitches in the practice round. We may have more glitches. Cutting to the chase. Okay. The book is really, really, really impressive. First, in the wealth of details it provides to support the basic argument, and second, in the way it utilizes economic theory to predict winners and losers in the new AI brokered economy. The key takeaway: representation determines reward. That's a quote from, and what that means, it's a little cryptic. If the platform can't measure it doesn't get compensated. Page 119. And so it is what the platform can see. And sometimes, the platform used to be a human managed corporation. Increasingly, the platform is an AI automated system. So, what is it? It is work. The things that humans and machines do that are valued enough to be rewarded with a share of the revenue, what Sangeet calls a slice of the pie. I want to say his metaphors are fantastic. Pi is what a given system generates when the system is properly implemented. The system is both social and technical, and the social side of it is what can be rearranged as the technology changes. Humans and machines now are increasingly competing for work that leads to pi. This, I think, is potentially problematic because in our civilization, work justifies your existence. No work, no pi. But in free societies, humans are responsible for finding their own work. That's a fundamental responsibility of the individual and the parents who are training the individual and the teachers. Take responsibility, find your work, find your cause, find what you can do to fit into the larger economy and social system. Mandatory work translates into prisons, poorhouses, which we're not so far away from in time, slavery. All of these are considered extremely repugnant. Now, I'm going to switch a little bit. Tasks are the units of work. Tasks are what are the first level of reshuffling is the task. Then you start reshuffling the organizations, the ecosystems, the value chains. And AI allows many analytic and representational tasks to be transferred to machines, computers, robots, chatbots, sensors, monitors, even barcodes. Tasks are getting reshuffled. The first line of reshuffling is the task. And because the machines can perform the task very fast and very cheaply without, in many cases, human participation, I want to say recognizing the reshuffling places Sangeet light years ahead of most commentators on AI, including most economists and most strategists. And these are the important things I took away from the book. in coming to understand the shuffling. First, the disruptive power of AI is real and already with us. I didn't count, but I think there are close to 100 examples, ranging from barcodes to Uber Freight to CRMs to fashion to Sephora, just so many examples. The data is overwhelming. And he shows how coordinating innovations have changed the task flows in old and new enterprises and just changed the nature of work and the nature of human jobs. The jobs aren't necessarily fewer, but they're different. And this is what I want to talk about in the minutes I have left. They're different in ways that are not necessarily good for human beings. The pie gets resliced, and some slices are smaller in various ways, get less pie, but are also less rewarding in terms of psychological return. It gets resliced, and because the platform can't see a lot of stuff that humans do, the human jobs become simpler. Let me give an example, and wonderful metaphor in the book, Sangeet mentioned it in passing, is a post-AI job above the algorithm or below the algorithm? Uber drivers are below the algorithm. They obey its orders, the orders given to them as to what work to do. The algorithm, in effect, designs their work on a minute-by-minute basis. You and I are below the algorithm when these are users, not workers. When we struggle to navigate a poorly designed website or a new human interface or a help desk that doesn't really help or a company that doesn't want to issue a refund and uses the complexity of its website processes, its automated processes to drive you from the space. Who's above the algorithm? What? So those who have the power to change the algorithms to suit their perceptions and preferences. That would be managers, programmers, product designers, influencers. And going back to the Uber drivers, because the platform only sees what it can measure, it defines the driver's job much more narrowly than the pre-AI job. Sangeet makes this totally clear in his discussion of Uber Freight, but it applies to Uber people as well. Almost all the driver's discretion goes away, even when the job remains. There's still one driver, one truck, but what the driver does is better because the platform, the algorithm, becomes a substitute for the driver's agency. This transfer of agency from person to machine is what pays for all the people above the algorithm, plus the data centers, plus the electricity they consume, plus the increase in share prices, which is a guess on what's going to happen in the future. The transfer of agency also justifies paying the drivers less. Maybe not immediately, but maybe so. So here's the transfer of agency. It creates a competitive dynamic where the algorithm sits between heaven and earth, and agency flows from the drivers below the algorithm to the innovators, managers, and designers and machines above the algorithm, and the job becomes de-skilled and the drivers are paid less. In a free market, you cannot stop this flow. It is self-perpetuating. It is a dynamic, and Sangeet is great at describing the instances where this dynamic takes hold and goes round and round and round and modularizes the industry, the supply chain, work, everything. What scares me about this is that this dynamic, in fact, lies at the core of the whole phenomenon of technological progress, what Schumpeter called creative destruction. Mokyr, Aghion, Howitt just received a Nobel Prize, notably for their work on creative destruction. And I recommend reading Mokyr's Creative Destruction or Destructive Creation, a prelude on the Industrial Revolution, which is almost the last thing. He wrote it in 2022. It appeared in Aghion and Howitt's edited volume of many, many contributors on creative destruction. And so here's the deal. I wanted to say one thing. If you read Mokyr's paper, the man, it's a brilliant paper. His scholarship is amazing. And he is completely conflicted in his own mind and soul about whether creative destruction is a good thing. I think it would be very interesting to listen to his Nobel lecture because the conflict is very apparent in his late work. So here's a glimpse, maybe, of the future. This is from a book by auteur, from an article by auteur that looks at real wages since 1963, the percent change. And it stratifies by, at the bottom are people with less education. First, it's men and women, and high school dropouts, high school graduates, some college, bachelor's degree, graduate degree. And what you can see is the incredible spread of inequality over these last years. The rising tide did not necessarily lift all boats. People were left behind. When the beneficiaries of technical innovation, of creative destruction, are future generations of humans, I'm okay with that, despite dislocations in the short run. When the beneficiaries of technical innovation are a small number of technocrats and their machines and the servants of their machines, I'm not so sure how I feel about that. You get the haves and the have-nots. So again, I recommend two books, H.G. Wells' 1895, The Time Machine, and Neil Stephenson, 1995, The Diamond Age, both of which are about where widespread technical change that's concentrated in benefiting a small number of people leads the whole society. These are amazing books, and I'll stop with that.
Great. Thanks so much, Carliss. That was good. Thanks for bringing us to broader social impact. I think we'll all have these ideas on mind, right? Not only what businesses should do, but how this affects society. So that was great. Now I'd like to welcome Riitta Katila, who's the W.M. Keck Senior Professor of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University and the Faculty Director of the Stanford Technology Ventures Program. She's a leading scholar at the intersection of technology strategy and organizational learning, known for her research on how firms innovate, compete, and grow, particularly in technology-intensive industries. Riitta, thanks so much for being with us today. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the wonderful pronunciation of my name. Bo, you have excellent capabilities. Thanks for inviting me. These two presentations that we just heard, very, very tough act to follow. Carliss, you were amazing, and Sangeet, congratulations on this book. I hadn't seen the Thinkers 50 Award, but I read the book, and these days I don't think we read books from cover to cover that much anymore, but I did read your book. So it took a while. It's 400 plus pages. I know everybody else has got the book, so if you didn't dig in yet, do. It is a wonderful and also very researchable and very teachable work. So I'm going to be brief in my comments. Carliss covered so much, so deeply, that I feel a little humbled and just to offer any comments right now, but I will try just add a little bit here. So just to decode the big ideas, that there are many big ideas in the book, and I am invited to panels to talk about AI and strategy. I'm one of those to blame these days, and this book is much deeper. So the panels, you're absolutely right, Sangeet, saying that we talk about automation and augmentation. Nobody really at this level has talked about the systems view of AI. So that is a very deep and insightful contribution. So how do we shift value creation from tasks to orchestration? So to me, that was definitely a big insight of the book. You also mentioned in your intro that the book is for managers, and I think it's also for strategy scholars, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But two ideas struck me as big ideas that I want to teach in my tech strategy class in January for my master's students. So what are those big ideas? The second bullet here, who are the winners going to be in this new AI driven economy? And by AI, I'm thinking agents, LLMs and agents in my mind. I'll get to the definition in just a little bit. But who are the winners? So if I teach strategy, what does the book say? So the winners are the companies that reduce unpredictability. So give confidence in these high stakes, uncertain moments. I love the examples. This is so teachable. So I love the picking the wine, the Palantir example. There's a lot about education and what we do as teachers and professors, which is really thoughtfully written. Best Buy is also a very nice example of high stakes purchases and why everything else automated, even if you have your AI agent buy you a new dishwasher, a new dryer. I actually need a new dryer. So even if you could do that, ChatGPT is pretty good at that and recommendations, but this is still high stakes. So why do we still go to Best Buy and get them deliver and give us recommendations? So the book is perfect, reducing unpredictability. The other big idea for firms, this is a really practical strategy insight, again, that comes from the framework in the book, is the idea that where do we fit in as a firm? Well, you look into opportunities where AI breaks the system. So yes, it will eliminate some of the jobs, it will reconfigure the system, but it also creates new problems. And there are again wonderful examples of how the system breaks down, maybe from the platform era. Airbnb, creates new opportunities, but also creates new problems. There are unsafe properties, that creates new economic opportunity. So again, the book does a really good job of motivating the idea of why managers should be reading the book, where to look for opportunities. The last point about the big insights that I personally gained from the book is I think it's very researchable and it's very teachable. So teachable, obviously, there are great examples that very nicely you start with examples and then you return to them and go deeper and deeper as the chapters and the book progresses. So very nicely done. There are also, as you start thinking about these ideas of reshuffle, it's not about the task, but it's about the entire system reconfiguration. There are some clear mechanisms that are testable. If you're an experiment person, you could be starting to think about how to use this in your research as well. So I think very nicely done. Okay, memorable cases and something to dig deeper. So here are two things that if I were a manager reading your book, I'd like to understand better. So you discuss these are, I think, ideas that appear most prominently around pages 294 and 295 in the book. But there are two things. So first is you introduce the idea that there are two tool providers in this AI world that could be benefiting, could be profiting, but there's also something to be said about solution providers. So I think the anesthesiology example was very good there. So I was a little bit unclear if I were a manager whether I should become a tool provider, or if I am a tool provider, should I also expand to become a solution provider? So that was one open question for me after reading your book. The other open question that appeared shortly after the tools versus solution providers was, should we build or should we buy these AI capabilities? So that was again another open question for me. Okay, let me add three final things to ponder, and then I'll will have Nicolas have his say on this as well. So the first question I was wondering throughout the book, and this is just bigger than what is AI, but I was wondering, you use the word AI, and I think it's clever because the technology is moving very fast. If you just used LLMs, you would have missed multi-agent systems. So I do understand why you used AI, but again, I think it's a broad term, so it's something to think about if you wanted to be more precise there. The other definitional issue I was not struggling with, but I think it was interesting to think about throughout the book is, are the insights, the mechanisms, the new ways of value creation that you propose, are they unique to AI, or what is unique to platforms? Some of the things that you mentioned, algorithmic control, attention to what we can measure, attention to what the platforms promote, we already saw when we talked about platforms. So is this more of the same, or is this something unique about LLMs and agents that we didn't yet know in the platforms era? And I'm pointing out, we have Kathy Eisenhardt, myself, and Phil Reinecke have an academic management annals piece on decentralization of organizations, and we go all the way from bureaucracy to platforms. And I'm almost like, if I had seen your book, we would have put this as kind of maybe the prologue or the end of the book, because I think we're becoming more and more like bureaucracies. But the other thing I was wondering is if you can use sort of the classic division of what bureaucracy do really well. They divide labor, they process information, they monitor really well, as sort of the way to think about these new organizations. Anyway, two very quick other things. So I was thinking about an experiment. So if I had read your book and I was a researcher, how would I test this? So you're saying that automation is out, a systems reconfiguration is in. What if I had a task? Could I run a horse race between two teams? One team that is using AI to speed existing tasks, and then the second that is reconfiguring the system. But then I was struggling to design this experiment, and there is where I kind of needed your help more. If we reconfigure the system, should I let the team redesign their workflow, or is the AI redesigning the system? And what would this horse race look like? And then the final thought I had was, I was just listening. I just saw somewhere that Uber is moving not only to, because of self-driving cars, not only a ride-sharing platform, but is also now offering maybe also in the US opportunities to code and do more knowledge work. So kind of white collar task rabbit in the US. And I was wondering how that expansion to, because it's a very different labor force now, it's to now you're including some people that were previously above the algorithm to below the algorithm. How does that change everything? Anyway, sorry, I tried to cram in a lot in a very short period of time. A fabulous book, congratulations, and then now back to Bo.
Great, thanks, Riitta, and Sangeet. You'll have an opportunity to comment on these when we have the discussion. And I'm cheating a little bit, Riitta. I'm a 25% finished, so I have a little bit of sisu in the veins, so helps me with pronunciation.
Swedish does not count for
No, but my great grandparents came from Finland to the U.S., so my wife is Swedish. I'm a tricky guy to track down, figure out where I'm from.
No kidding, no.
All right. Last but not least, co-founder of DCI, Nicolas Petit, who's also the chair in competition law and the head of the law department at the European University Institute in Florence. His work sits at the intersection of EU and US competition law, innovation, and technological change, and is widely known for his influential book on big tech and the digital economy, the oligopoly scenario. He also played a prominent role in the policy group as a member of the European Commission for the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. Over to you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Bo. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Very good. So I want to start by congratulating Sangeet for an impressively rich book, which is, to me, marked by a very heavy use of case studies, excellent metaphors, and a lot of repetition also to drive the point home. So the book is long, but you never lose the core message. I think I'm the least qualified person on this panel to opine on the book. I'm a lawyer and I'm sort of self-trained economist, so I'm going to try to provide my views, but I want to set expectations as low as they should be. All right, so my understanding of the book is that there are 3 important descriptive claims and 2 important normative ones. These are the ones that I kept with me as I finished the book. The descriptive claims, number 1, AI expands coordination opportunities and reduces coordination costs. Descriptive claim number 2, AI's, and I think it's a very deep one, AI's largest impact is on systems, which it reconfigures, rather than on individuals or on tasks, which the press and the public opinion tend to obsessively focus on. And descriptive claim number 3 is this idea that Carliss referred to, which is that AI renders tacit knowledge visible, codifiable, and transferable. So for me, these are the 3 big descriptive ideas that the book pushes forward in a novel way. Now, as to the normative claims, which I say normative, by this I mean more the sort of business and management science book where you try to derive some guidance or guidelines for business people. It seems to me I take 2 wisdoms from the book. The first one is that for businesses, AI establishes new rules for competitive advantage. And specifically, this point comes across at the end of the book. It encourages investments in identifying what Sangeet calls coordination gaps. So where you have a coordination gap is where value resides. And that is where you can make profit and carry ahead, well ahead of your competition. So that's the take for the normative take for businesses. And for individuals, because there's a lot of the book that is also about the future of work, right? So that makes the book a little bit of a hybrid relative to a standard, business book. So for individuals, and Carliss also picked this up, the key point for me with this idea that people need to be attentive to where they are relative to the algorithm. Are they above or below? And in some occupations, you can be sent above or you can be sent below. And the type of activities that you want to think about in the future need to be informed by where you're going to stand relative to the algorithm. Are you going to be on top or are you going to be below, right? And that's how you want to think about your future as a worker, right? Especially, you know, as Carliss was again very aptly saying, our society, Western societies are based on this idea that work is a main component of dignity. The right to dignity that we have is supplied and made effective by an economic occupation. All right, so that's what I take from the book. Now, as a general reader, now as an antitrust lawyer, which is what I'm trained in, I think the book has a very interesting message, which is not really pushed in writing, but which, you know, you can come away with. So, function in merger agencies only occasionally recognize reshuffling as a form of competitive pressure. And this is extremely well exemplified in the two illustrations that Sangeet gave during the talk a few minutes ago. So in FTC versus Facebook, the case in which the FTC has sued Facebook for the acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram, the FTC refused to consider that TikTok was in the same relevant market as Facebook. And the reason for this was that TikTok had designed its graph in a different way as Facebook. So this technological difference, this design difference, was sufficient for the FTC to consider that Facebook and TikTok were not competitors, right? And that's interesting because, you know, Sangeet's books calls attention to the fact that this particular difference in the design of the graph is what allows competitive advantage to have teeth, right? All right. Now take the other case that Sangeet mentioned, the Adobe Figma case. In that case, the merger agencies of the Western world, mostly the CMA in the UK, but also in the US and the EU, cases were started to be discontinued. The merger was abandoned, so the CMA basically terminated the merger on the theory that Figma, through reshuffling, was a very serious competitive threat to Adobe, right? And so when you look at these two cases together, what you see is a very inconsistent understanding of reshuffling as a force, as a competitive, as a channel of competitive pressure that really requires function agencies to engage with this book, because they will probably get a better and more consistent understanding of how competition empirically works in dynamic industries. All right, so that's what I wanted to say. Bo, can you give me 3 more minutes? All right, so I would say I have 2 critiques of the book, which I probably have to do more with the question of genre. I don't know if you say that in English. In French, we say that, the genre, the style, right? The sort of audience targets. So it's not a book written for academics or policymakers. And so the book doesn't really engage very deeply with, I think, economic theories that do a lot of heavy lifting at explaining what Sangeet is trying to explain. So I was thinking so many times about Ronald Coase, the nature of the firm, you know, Schumpeter's, not just the sort of big creative destruction, but when he talks about new combinations. I was also thinking about Herbert Simon's work on abundance. I also had George Akerlof's Lemons Markets, you know, work in mind, and so that to me was a bit the sort of unsung heroes in the book, where all these people that had been, you know, bringing these to sort of economic rigor. Similarly, I think the book sometimes doesn't really averages a little bit the technical differences between AI systems, and so, you know, for instance, when the book speaks about Google Maps, I mean, Google Maps was designed as a very, very bulky rule-based system a long time ago, right? And of course, it's been transformed by the sort of latest wave of AI research, but it's not so much like, it's not like the latest AI, you know, technology that is actually doing the heavy work here. So there's more than just that. Sometimes it was really dumb AI, and so I think the book could probably work work even better if it was to dissect a little bit the sort of technical variations within AI systems themselves. All right, I had 3 questions at the end, so I'm just going to throw them here. So at the end of the book, you say that there is a mechanism underlying reshuffling. And I was asking myself, okay, what is this mechanism? So we understand that there is reshuffling, but is there a regularity that would allow you to single out one mechanism, or is this industry or sector or economy wide? Is this mechanism of coordination based on hierarchy or on cooperation? So that's not, that could be, I mean, it's just, you set out the high level idea here. And then I think there's a lot of work to do. The second question was, I thought about another book. So Carliss was saying, well, you made me think about a book. When I read your book, I was thinking about a big and very well-known book, which is Dune from Frank Herbert. So in Dune, the pilots of the guilds, they can travel across planets over extremely long distances because they have AI, right? So AI became a tool that enabled an entirely wider economy, universe-wide, that that's allowed like access to resources that didn't exist and this and that. So one day, of course, as we know, that was what's called the Butlerian Jihad that led to prohibit using AI, and then the pilots started to use spies to have the same cognitive ability as AI-assisted pilots, right? But so I think what would really help is whether you could tell us what kind of universe of opportunities AI will unlock of the same kind as interplanetary travel and the associated economy. Just like in your containerization example, that's the same stuff, right? And the third question is more of a sort of policy towards business question. So we are seeing companies like Apple and Facebook today being slightly, I would say it looks like Apple and Facebook are being reshuffled by Microsoft and Google, right? So I wouldn't say they're lagging behind. It's very clear that from their behavior that they've been lagging behind. And isn't it the case that they are being reshuffled? So this, oligopoly of platform that we had, the GAFA companies, the fans, there is reshuffling going on there. And what should be the optimal consumption or IP policy response to that reshuffling?